Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind Season 3 cast member interviews after the show aired. Let's watch.
Man, it's like you didn't even preface it with like anything normal that like dudes would say. You know, we're like, yo, bro, the other day I went and did this with that guy. Like, we like,
Yeah.
Gross. That's gross. Men are good communicators and women are terrible. Gross. So, yeah, well, you know, dude, I don't know if he's just on some sort of comedic riff or something, but this is unbecoming.
It's like you didn't even preface it with like anything normal that like dudes would say. You know, we're like, yo, bro, the other day I went and did this with that guy. Like, we like, you know, and they're just like,
it's a cohesive thought.
they just think we are reading their minds. Like
that right there. That right there. Women, if you're listening to this,
We can't do it.
we cannot.
We can't do
We
it.
are.
Okay, so if they said the women in my life, okay, I can't refute that. I wouldn't want to. So is it possible that the women in their life, this has been an issue where they feel accused of doing something wrong in the relationship or in life, and they feel like they don't hear about the emotion until it's blown up, right? And certainly that seemed to be happening with Zenab and Cole. Then okay, you know, in their relationship, that's what it's like. But, you know, all women out there, like, there are so many men that I can think of off the top of my head who will do this to women, where they will expect their wives to read their minds and will speak in convoluted, cryptic ways. Now, why would they do that? So if we think systemically, why would the women in their life, to be clear, not women, but the women in their life, well, it's often because they are afraid to come forward, not because of abuse necessarily, but possibly, but more in a more mundane way. Women in their life would be afraid to come forward with smaller complaints or smaller requests because things don't usually go well in those conversations. They usually get dismissed or hurt or rejected or misunderstood, or it starts to fight. And so they have concerns and they have feelings, but they don't trust their partners to come forward. And if your partner is sexist and misogynist about women, then I would understand why you would not want to come forward with your vulnerability, because you would be labeled as some sort of ridiculous, frivolous human female.
Have Cole answer this
right.
one for sure.
Hit
No,
me
go
with
ahead,
it.
man. Go ahead. What stops men from going to therapy?
I think we just don't think it'll help. I mean, like baseline, we're kind of like, I don't need that. It's not going to help me. Or I just don't want to go talk to somebody who's like someone I don't really look up to. Like most therapists, maybe it's like a middle-aged woman or something, and you just feel like there's not a lot of like relatability to me, right? If I'm a young man or any aged man, like a lot of therapists are women. So I think like,
Yeah, I think that is a common thing that people will say. The way I would say it is that men are socialized not to ask for help and to not think about emotions, to think a little bit more narcissistically, to try to be more self-sufficient in a pathological way, to also think of potentially older women, as he's saying, as not knowing anything about their lives. Older women can know a lot about a young man's life. There are older women therapists that help a lot of young men in a variety of ways. You don't have to be a man to understand a client. So, you know, there's that. And but, you know, he's in therapy, so I think that he supports the notion of going to therapy, right?
guys realizing like, you know, just those things are the reasons why they don't go. But yeah, but those things aren't true. Like,
Yeah.
you can get help, like you should, and like a lot of counselors, although they may be either gender, like they can relate to you.
Great. Yeah, I want to be able to give thumbs up. So, thumbs up. Yeah.
So
good.
yeah,
That's really good. I actually, yeah, because I found myself kind of judgy in the first couple, you know, things with different therapists. I'm like, what do you, I don't know if I, you know,
yeah.
trust how you really like understand where I'm coming from.
And a big
And that's totally fine. It could indicate a bad fit, could indicate a bad therapist, could indicate something's off. That's okay. I always tell people at least 3, if not 5, try out 3 to 5 therapists when you're looking for a therapist and pick the one that feels like the best fit. The chance that you're going to have a good fit, an optimal fit, the first therapist that you try out, even if you get a referral from someone saying, oh yeah, this would be a good therapist for you, the chance that that would happen is actually not very high. I don't know, anecdotally, I would say that it's like a 50% chance, maybe a little bit more than that. So, there's a pretty good chance that it's not the right one for you. And people almost never do that. I feel like people will just pick the first therapist that they find and then just stick with it, regardless of the helpfulness of it. Or it won't be a good fit. They'll drop out of therapy and they just think, well, therapy won't help, instead of considering like maybe it was just that particular therapist. I mean, therapists, y'all out there, if you've ever been to more than one therapist, particularly if you've been to 5 to 10 therapists like I have, you know that therapists are very different. And of course, as a therapist and as a professor and as a mentor to therapists, I also know that therapists, I would venture to say that no 2 therapists are the same. Like every therapist is a very unique helper and and provides a very unique vibe. And 2 people coming together is also a unique thing. Me as a therapist, I am me, but the way that I come together, the way that I connect, the way that I join with different clients is unique to that client. With some clients, I'm pretty active. With other clients, I'm very subdued. With some clients, I'm jokey. Other clients, I'm really not. With some clients, I feel this way. So everything is different. So when you are looking for a therapist, shop around. That's the point.
Yeah, I'm seeing a therapist, a counselor. Yeah.
How has that been for you?
It's been really good. Just to what it's done is it's sparked things in me that I'm then like, I need to go talk to that person.
Okay.
That's been some of the biggest things that counseling
Yeah.
is, that I'll be, because this is what we do, right? Is like we make something way bigger than it really is. So I'll be in therapy sharing about how, well, I'm so hurt and this is my problem and this is what's going on. And the whole time I'm talking, I'm like, I'm just talking about that person.
Right.
And so I'm just like, I'm going to go call them.
That's so good, Cole.
And it's like, you're not getting anything done talking behind someone's back. Even if you're talking about them in therapy, it's like at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting a glimpse into one of the things that he talks about with his therapist, which is that he will be talking about someone else, about how he's angry at someone, hurt about someone, and then he realizes on his own as he's talking about this that he should go and talk to that person, presumably to be vulnerable and to tell that person that he cares about the relationship and is hurt by something, upset about something, not in an accusatory way, hopefully.
You got to talk to them if you're ever going to take ground and fix that issue.
That's
really
good.
solid advice, Cole.
Yeah.
Do you feel that some of your relationships have changed because of therapy? Like you're beginning to see things differently?
Yeah, they're going to get better. They're going to get better.
Okay.
Yeah, my relationships are going to get better because of therapy.
Yeah.
Because as you become healthier, everyone who you relate to becomes healthier and your relationships become healthier.
So
Okay, yeah. I agree, Cole. Absolutely. That's good. So, I don't know. Oh, this is great. I hope we get some more specifics. I'm curious.
I'm gonna throw this out there. Then you see the healthy relationships in your life, but you also can also see relationships that perhaps you should not be sewing into as much.
Absolutely.
Okay. Have you seen that too?
I do. I see
Okay.
them. I haven't yet cut them
Yeah.
because I guess I'm just now starting to see them. And
Yeah.
but yes, I need to do that next.
No, well, okay,
Yeah,
and that's not me just pointing stuff out. That's something that I just discovered. Once you get a good
So it's interesting. It reminds me of a lot of conversations I've had with clients on a number of topics, but this particularly where the host of the YouTube channel asked him, have you realized not only relationships that you need to lean into, but relationships that you might want to lean away from? And Cole is saying, yeah, absolutely, but I haven't done that yet, but I need to. And when I talk with clients, I don't always remember this because it's not intuitive to me anyway, but that because I guess I live in this world, but I think for most people, when they realize something, or when in therapy you realize something like, oh yeah, I guess that relationship is kind of unhealthy, or I guess that situation isn't very good for me, or I guess maybe I do really want that to change that, or I should be changing that. For a lot of people, the implication is you will do that now. Because we just realized that that relationship is bad for you, of course, as soon as you're done with the session, you're going to go cut off that relationship because we just established that you need to do that. But as a therapist, and I think most therapists are this way, we understand that things take time and that it's just our narrative right now. And we collaborated on that narrative and on that conceptualization. Maybe next week you can think, well, maybe there's some flexibility there. So I sometimes have to remind myself to tell the client, by the way, just because we identified that relationship as not healthy in your life, which is fine, that does not mean that I, as your therapist, expect you to take action on that right away. The reason why I need to say that is because I don't want clients to feel pressure to do something by me. And also, I don't want them to be ashamed of themselves or to feel like I'm judging them if they don't take action. Therapists who have been around the block a few times understand that things take time. Literally, where someone could say, definitely I need to get a divorce. I don't want to be with that person anymore. This relationship is done. I'm no longer in love. I've explored it fully for 3 years in therapy. This relationship is over. It could take 3 to 5 years after that point for the person to actually pull the plug on the relationship. It takes time. People need time, and they're allowed that. They deserve that. So now some people will divorce right after. That's very rare, but things take time, and there's no pressure. So because another thing that'll happen is some clients will hide things because, say, we develop this conceptualization that a relationship is toxic or something, and then I don't remind them that I don't care either way. I care, but I don't expect them, and this isn't about my expectations anyway. And then the client could avoid the relationship, avoid taking action, and then they come into session next time and they lie and they say, yeah, I cut myself off, or they kind of did it, but they didn't do it fully, or the relationship starts back up again and they don't want to tell me because they're worried that I'm going to judge them and think that they're sliding back in therapy or something, particularly if they have relational traumas that are along those lines. So I don't know if we just kind of heard a little bit of that in Cole's voice. Let's rewind.
I do. I see them. I haven't yet cut them.
Yeah.
Because I guess I'm just now starting to see them. And but yes, I need to do that next.
No, well,
yeah, and even if you're not in therapy and you realize that you need to do something, is to take it easy on yourself and allow yourself to take some time. Because actually, one of the things that can happen is if you judge yourself and you think of yourself as a loser, that can actually cause the opposite to happen, where you end up procrastinating about it because you don't want to face it because you're ashamed of the fact that you haven't taken action. And so you just don't even face it at all. And thus the change never occurs, right? So take it easy on yourself. People need time and things are complicated.
hey, you know what? I should have told you, your view of yourself and certain relationships is also going to change. And so even some of the relationships that you have been investing in, you may not want to.
Wow.
Because you're realizing that they're not bringing something to you. And so it is a process. And me personally, I didn't just go and like cut people off. You know, I don't think that was the answer for me. The answer was just to stop investing the energy there and invest it where it is coming back to me. There is an actual, you know, like fold, like a harvest.
The depth of
2 thumbs up to this conversation, and I can attest to that as well. When I think about some top moments for me in therapy, a couple come to mind along these lines where I have been beating my head against a wall trying to change a relationship or please someone in a way that might not be possible or might not be fair to me, isn't fair to me. And to get that validation from a therapist can be really helpful. Intellectually, I might understand that I'm being treated unfairly, but to really hear someone else's perspective, you really think, oh, okay, and was very helpful to me. That I hold to this day. There are certain things that I do in my life, boundary-wise, that developed and began, me establishing that boundary like 15 years ago in therapy during one particular moment in one particular session. Like there's this one visualization I have being in therapy where something like that happened, and I can picture it, and I guess I kind of subconsciously recall that feeling and that image when I need to call upon it to hold the boundary, right, and to motivate me. And very, very helpful. Now, I will say there's a flip side to this, which is potentially bad therapy and destructive, that if a client comes to therapy and is distorted in terms of their perceptions, or the therapist has significant countertransference and is losing objectivity, or is just a bad therapist, there can be this simple answer that can be like, well, you just got to cut yourself off from that person. You got to quit your job. You got to divorce that person. I've seen people give bad advice sometimes along these lines, but therapists as well. I've seen examples of this where, like a client comes in complaining about their partner, and whereas what I would deem to be a competent, wise therapist would conclude that the relationship isn't toxic to the point where the therapist should start to potentially recommend some boundaries or to leave the relationship or something. So the relationship is workable, yet this bad therapist or this reactive therapist, countertransference-wise therapist, starts to engineer the conversation to get the client to leave to leave that other person, or might even just say, "You need to get a divorce. That's a terrible relationship." And I've heard about those cases. I've seen those cases, and so that is the flip side of the coin, right? And it takes a competent, wise therapist who's been through a lot of therapy themselves, does a lot of consultation, does a lot of continuing education, has a lot of supervision, reflects a lot on their own bias, has a procedure to explore things with the client so that the therapist doesn't just forge ahead on their own agenda. It's really complicated because what's the line, right? As a therapist, if you start to have a conversation around a client potentially leaving someone or drawing a boundary with someone, how do you know that that's actually in the best interest of the client? Or is it your agenda? Or is the client misrepresenting what's really happening in the relationship? Does that matter? There's a myriad of questions. There's thousands of questions that need to be contemplated and never really answered because you never know the answer. That's why therapy is so strange. And that's why therapists are so insecure when they start out as therapists, because there's very little ability to evaluate whether or not you're doing the right thing or not. There are ways you can evaluate that, but it's hard, particularly on a micro moment, like second to second, the things you do, the way you listen, the question you ask, the vibe you have, the ideas you have, the conceptualizations you have, the diagnoses that you have. It's really hard to lock down whether or not you're doing the right thing. And so it takes a ton of experience and a ton of trial and error, a ton of learning from the clients, a ton of reflecting on your own life and your own changing process, a ton of experiencing your own therapy as a therapist to emerge into a place of wisdom such that you're less likely to make those mistakes.
Of the relationship changes.
Yeah.
You stop sharing so much with someone that you know is going to either...
Now, I want to be clear, novice therapists are not bad therapists. Research actually does not show that. Research shows that outcomes for therapists at the beginning of their career or at the end of their career, it's highly variable, meaning that the more experience you have as a therapist doesn't necessarily mean you have better outcomes in therapy. It's very complicated. So, because I don't want, if, say, for example, your therapist is an intern, they're at the very beginning of their career, that does not mean that they can't be helpful, but it does mean that they're probably more insecure about, well, I can almost guarantee you that if you have a novice therapist or an intern, that their insecurities are greater than their insecurities will be in the rest of their career. It doesn't mean that you are responsible, and it means it actually, you are not responsible for your therapist's insecurities. But if you're a therapist, and I know many of you are, it's okay to be insecure. It's normal. What I tell people is you should be insecure as a novice therapist because there's so much to learn. If you're not somewhat insecure, not that you should think you're a terrible therapist or that you're incompetent, but if you don't have some humility to the enormity that is the responsibility and the clinical learning responsibilities that is to be a therapist, then you're delusional or narcissistic or something. So there's so much. I've been a therapist for 26 years, right? And I've been in psychology, studying it for 28 years or something, 29, and I feel like I barely understand most of it. There's so much to know. And I feel like I know enough to operate with a fair amount of confidence most of the time. But it's taken me a long time. And think about my career. I've been kind of living psychology and psychotherapy 24/7. That's an exaggeration, but I was a student, and then I was a professor and a therapist. And as a therapist, as a novice therapist, I practiced like 70 hours a week because I had 3 jobs because I was trying to pay off my student loans, and I worked 7 days a week. And so I had a lot of opportunity to learn, that during those times with all those hours. I was a professor, and I was working underneath a mentor who would help me, and I had a number of other supervisors. And then I went, was a professor and a therapist, and then I became a full-time professor, and then I went back to get another master's and another doctorate. And then when I started the podcast, that added a whole other aspect to learning. I mean, every episode that I make, particularly the audio podcast, I have to learn a whole new topic. And I've looked into so many different things. And my friends, I've brought them onto the podcast. Umberto is a friend. Bob is a friend. Rebecca is a friend. And so we will talk shop outside of the podcast and work, and we'll talk shop inside the podcast. And so so much of my life in the last 29 years has been centered around psychology and psychotherapy and science and research and academia and all the things, development as a therapist, countertransference, all this stuff. How to help people change, personality, just countless topics that I'm thinking about and talking about and experiencing constantly. And I apply these things in my personal life all the time. I'm talking with my neighbor and I'm thinking about attachment styles. I mean, it's all the time. It's constant. And so, and yet I know that I know barely anything about anything at this point. So for the average, clinician career-wise, they don't have a career like mine. They don't live and breathe this the way that I have. So it takes a long time to learn even a little bit enough to feel confident. So if you're a therapist, just take it easy, but, dedicate the time and the space and don't avoid the reality that you have a lot to learn. And I do too. All right. Well, that is it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.